Good morning, everybody. It's Isabella here from Altumimi & Company's corporate structuring team. I would like to briefly welcome you and just update you. We'll give it 2 more minutes as a number of participants are still doing their registration, and we are going to kick off shortly. Good morning. I'm back here with you. I think we've got a number of people who have already joined us. You won't be able to see me throughout the webinar, but I thought I would just, be visible before we kick off. Good morning, everybody. Probably all of you know I'm Isabella Szatkowska, and I'm a partner in the corporate structuring team of Altumimi & Company. I will be here with my colleague, Nov Al-Kafaji. Nov is a senior associate in our corporate structuring team. A number of you, I would imagine, would have had a contact with us already, would have worked with us in relation to DIFC issues or some other matters. So it's very good to have you here again. For those of you who haven't had a chance to work with us, we're very happy to have you participate in this webinar with us. Just some of the things that concern the organization of the webinar. You probably will be happy to hear that we are recording the content, and after the webinar, each of you is going to get the webinar link. We will be able to share it with you. Also, when it comes to the actual questions and answers, unfortunately, there are a number of participants to the webinar, and it would be very difficult for us to address the questions throughout the webinar, but we will be receiving questions from you over the chat that is available through the platform, and we will be able to identify what questions were received from which party. We will reply to your questions for sure. So please rest assured that your questions will be answered, but it's just for the benefit of everybody. We thought we would share the content that is generally applicable, and then we can discuss a number of detailed things with you individually offline. No questions will remain unanswered. That's our assurance. Now I'm going to turn off the camera, but you should be able to see the slides, and let us begin. Now, as you would know, over the past weeks, more so than months really, but for some of the countries months, we have been hit by some unprecedented events, and COVID-19, the virus has really paralyzed a number of countries throughout sectors of operation. Now, when it comes to the DIFC, really, we need to remember that the DIFC is a very proactive free zone. And being a proactive free zone, the DIFC carry on with various initiatives, regardless of the specific circumstances, such as COVID-19, but they also very proactively introduce innovation or new ways of really regulating operation of businesses if special circumstances such as COVID-19 appear. And what we have seen over the past months really has been a number of changes in the free zone that are a result of those two streams. Number one, some of the ongoing DIFC authority initiatives have actually started materializing. And an example of that will be some of the changes to the way that the DIFC portal and applications by companies are handled, and we'll tell you more about it. But also, there have been those changes that are, in fact, a direct response by the DIFC authority and the Register of Companies and the Governor's Office to the unprecedented COVID-19 situation. Now, what we would like to discuss with you today is we would tell you a little bit about the DIFC reopening measures and, you know, in what mode us as DIFC businesses, and, you know, I'm saying us because our firm, Altamimi & Company, our head office is a DIFC entity, so we can directly relate to a number of those reopening measures. We'll tell you about those. The DIFC have introduced an attractive stimulus package for existing businesses, but also for those who are considering expanding operations in the DIFC or coming to the DIFC. Those businesses, those of you who are not yet in the DIFC, we will tell you about the DIFC portal and what has changed and how much easier, you know, some of the things are now being processed with the Register of Companies through that portal for businesses. Now, the fourth part of our webinar will be dedicated to a directive that concerns emergency measures in relation to employment. So we'll tell you about those emergency measures and when, you know, in what circumstances they apply, what DIFC companies are allowed to do in relation to COVID-19 scenario when it comes to the employment relationships. But we would also like to highlight some other developments, and those other developments that would be of interest to you, we think, are the ones that concern the economic substance, the requirement to make a submission with the Register of Companies for existing DIFC businesses. We'll tell you a little bit about the expansion of the prescribed company regime, expansion that we are hoping to see enacted really soon enough, but that would be a very, very welcomed step, and also some of the developments that concern DIFC foundations regime. Now, the DIFC reopening, well, that's an important development for us. You may remember Dubai government introduced lockdown measures, and they came into force in March, and with various decrees impacted businesses throughout the Emirate, but they were actually pretty stringent. And the DIFC decided that it was time for DIFC businesses to start slowly going back to their operation, always making sure that there is security in place for employees, for business managers, for retailers who operate in the DIFC. Now, you may see on the slide that's in front of you that retailers in the DIFC, so shops that we've got in the DIFC, they are able to operate, and Gate District, Marble Walk, Gate Village, they are able to open their businesses. Some of them have opened, some of them have not. Let's remember that, of course, there are certain safety measures that they have to also implement to be able to open for business, right? Restaurants and coffee shops, there really cannot be much of the dine-in happening. Our measures have coincided with the Ramadan protocols, right? That also impact the way that businesses like restaurants and coffee shops operate. Delivery requests are entertained. Takeaway can be happening. When it comes to offices, for example, the number of officers who can actually come to the office physically and work from the office premises as opposed to working from home extends to the maximum of 30% of the workforce. Now, and I'll just stop here briefly. Companies have various ways of really monitoring the 30% of the workforce. One of the ways would be for the employee who wants to work from the office premises is to actually have to inform the HR manager or the office admin head, whoever is really in charge of employees' matters, that they would like to actually resume conducting their responsibilities physically from the office premises. Now, that HR individual or the office manager will be then holding a list of those who are coming into the office, and that person will be able to monitor whether those physically present at the office meet the requirement of maximum 30% of the workforce. There was the point in time, you might have heard, when entities required, well, actually the police required that an employee who moves from one place to the other would show a letter from the employer allowing that employee to actually physically conduct their work duties. Now, currently, there is no need under the DIFC regime or the Greater Dubai that your employees would carry a letter like that. But the positive element to the letter was that an employee had to inform the company that they were going to start conducting their duties at the work premises, which also gave control to the business when it came to the maximum allowed percentage of the workforce. So I would encourage you to think about really monitoring the 30% of the workforce. It's also important for you to think where logistically each of those 30% employees are actually based, because we need to make sure that there isn't too many people placed in a very confined part of the office. For example, the social distancing measures are still in place, and we need to make sure that there is distance of about 2 meters, at least 2 meters between one employee or the other, or that there are office partitions, that there are individual offices that are separated, that have doors, and employees in the offices have to wear masks. Now, so just a highlight, right, of those requirements that apply in the DIFC that largely concern Dubai Emirates on the whole. Now, employees at the premises or in the DIFC, everybody who is in the DIFC is supposed to wear a mask all the time. In the office premises, we are to wear masks when I greeted you. I didn't have a mask. I wanted to make sure that you can see me pretty well. But at the office, we are wearing masks. Now, when it comes to really coffee shops and restaurants, right? So the F&B outlets, again, they have to comply with the maximum 30% of their space for clients being taken up, not more than that. But also, they need to make sure that the arrangements for people for customers who are at the F&B outlet are such that between one table or the other, there is a space of minimum 2 meters. So again, really that social distancing is an important measure. Now, sales and promotions, and that's important, I think, for retailers especially, are not allowed at those retail shops, and that measure has been put together by the Dubai government, and it impacts the DIFC retailers as well. But the key objective is really to make sure that our operations do not incentivize our customers to physically come to the shop, because of course they would be putting themselves at health risk. They would potentially be putting ourselves at risk. So on one hand, of course, the authorities want the retailers to make sure that in the difficult times they are somehow sustaining their businesses, but the encouraged form would be, for example, e-commerce in times like that, not really promotions at big venues for health reasons. Now, valet parking, before we move to the stimulus offering, is also something that is not active in the DIFC at the moment. Those of you who have come to the DIFC over the past days might have noticed that everybody entering the free zone is entering the free zone only after the temperature check indicated that they do not have a fever. So whether we drive a car and drive into the car park or we walk into the DIFC, then security staff are checking if we're all healthy to make sure that within the free zone itself, we really, to the extent possible, do not contaminate ourselves. And in the free zone, we have to keep 2 meters distancing. Now, Nof is going to tell you about the DIFC stimulus offering. So now we know we can, to some extent, come into the free zone. Some of us can already operate from the free zone. Now, what has the DIFC come up with as the offering to lower the burden on the businesses now coming into the DIFC or operating in the DIFC? Over to you, Nof.
Thank you, Isabella. Hi, everyone. So in line with the Dubai government's economic stimulus program that was announced earlier this month, the DIFC has also introduced a series of fiscal easing initiatives to basically for the next up and coming 3 months to, in response to the global situation. So here are the highlights of the various fiscal measures that the DIFC have taken, which we will discuss briefly each in detail in the next coming slides. But just to give you an overview, there's the deferred payment on leases, no annual licensing or registration fees for new applicants. Also, existing entities have a reduction on their license renewal fees. There's also a reduction of property registration and property transfer fees, which we will be discussing, and free movement of labor and staff, provided that they hold the relevant requirements on where they will be moving to. So we will discuss each of these highlights in the next slides in further detail. So coming to deferred payment on leases. So the DIFC have issued a 3 months deferment on a 6 months payment plan for all DIFC owned properties. So that applies to DIFC investments and DIFC owned properties in the Gate building, the Gate District, buildings 2 to 5, Gate Village, buildings 1 to 8 and 10 and 11, and also within Fairgate Avenue. So for 3 months, which started on April the 15th to June 30th, these lower deferment of payment on leases will apply. Now moving on to no annual license fees and registration fees. So for new applications, this is completely waived. So any new applications for incorporation that are submitted through DIFC from April 15th to June 30th, they are completely waived from the license fee and registration fee. However, there are still fees that apply, including any DFSA fees, data protection fees, and also fees relating to confirmation statements and things like that for existing DIFC entities, which we will come to on the next slide. So for existing entities, license renewal fees are reduced by 10%. And also this is not applicable to data protection fees and DFSA fees, as we mentioned, but they are applicable to the license renewal fees for existing entities. And if you're wondering how these fees are applied, they should be applied automatically via the portal. So when you go to renew your license within that time frame period, the reduced 10% discount would have been applied directly on the portal. So you don't need to worry about going ahead and contacting DIFC for that. It should be automatically applied. And if it isn't applied automatically, you can reach out to us or the DIFC to have that discount applied on your license renewal fee. So moving on now to property registration. So this is applicable for all properties within the DIFC, and the DIFC will apply a reduction on freehold transfer fee from 5% to now 4% for any sale or purchase of property. And this is described here. And moving on to the next slide, free movement of labour. So the DIFC have no restriction on the free movement of employees in and out of the DIFC to other zones, provided that the employee has the necessary arrangements and contracts in place with their employers and request to transfer the visa or issue a seconded access card. And that is all submitted to the DIFC government services. And also, this must comply with any DFSA requirements that are in place when it comes to movement of labour. So these essentially are the stimulus offerings that DIFC are giving to DIFC companies, during this period in order to minimise the impact. So now we move on to the portal operations and the key developments that the DIFC have introduced in order to ease the way in which business is done through the portal. So I'll take you through the key changes. So initial approval and registration is under one platform. So this is a huge development, and this definitely assists new applications when registering for incorporation with the DIFC. So previously, initial approval and final registration were two processes that were done independently. So only the registration was done through the portal, and the initial approval phase was done directly with the DIFC business development team. So now, instead of going through the business development team and then going through the online portal system to register a company, it's all done through one system, making it much easier and less repetitive in terms of supplying information and documents and things like that. So it's all done through one portal online system, the initial approval and the final registration. We have tested the system, and it has proven to be an extremely time efficient way of incorporating a company, which makes the process with DIFC much easier than it was before and much simplified. So one approval sufficient for a structure. So in instances where you wish to have an entire structure implemented with DIFC, instead of incorporating each and every company and having to go through the process of obtaining initial approval for each company within a particular structure. Now, the new system allows for initial approval for the entire structure that is proposed to be incorporated with DIFC to be done at the same time. So if we have a client that wants to establish a particular structure, we can approach the DIFC through the online system, inform them of the entire structure that we intend to incorporate, and obtain initial approval on the entire structure, again, minimizing the time taken to establish a company in DIFC and easing the process entirely. So this is a really great development that we're seeing from the DIFC here. Similarly to that, name availability automatically verified online. So this means that when we previously, let's go back to how it was previously, we would approach DIFC business development team, inform them of the name of the proposed company or companies that we wish to establish in the DIFC, and gain approval on the name ahead of time to ensure that it meets DIFC's rules and requirements. And thereafter, we would then go ahead and register the company. So now what the system allows us to do is when we go onto the system to initiate an application for initial approval, we can check to see if the name is available there and then on the system, making it much more time efficient. And we will be able to see if the name is acceptable or not. And if the name is used by a similar entity in the DIFC, we are able to provide, if it's an affiliate or if we have a connection to that company and the reason for choosing a similar name is because of that reason, it's within the same group, we can inform DIFC of that and upload the relevant documents to support that. And we will have visibility on the name availability online, which was not there before, which again is a really, really attractive offering. And the final one is articles and the acceptance of the e-signature. So previously, during the registration process, when it comes to signing of the articles, or if it's a foundation, it's the bylaws or the charter or partnership agreement for LLPs, but those corporate documents would needed to be signed in the presence of a DIFC officer. So we would arrange a meeting with the DIFC, and we would go ahead either along with our client or via power of attorney from our client in order to sign those documents in person. So now that's no longer a requirement, and DIFC have implemented a DocuSign process which enables us to have e-signatures submitted instead of physical signatures. And given this current situation where everyone is working remotely at present, this is a huge development and just eases the way of doing business and incorporating an entity in DIFC, just that extra step and simplifying it for both corporate service providers and business owners within the DIFC or potential business owners that are moving into DIFC. So another development on the portal, this is very specific to the portal of existing DIFC entities, is that corporate service providers have, or either corporate service providers or companies in the DIFC that have multiple entities can have one username and login details to access multiple accounts. So previously, if you had multiple entities in DIFC or are handling multiple entities in DIFC, you would have individual login details for each company. So now that's no longer the case, and DIFC have issued one set of login details to enable either the corporate service provider or a company with multiple entities in DIFC to enable the system and locate all the details of the companies which they are handling with one username and login details. So that's really good, and saves a lot of time between logging in and locating those login details. Another development on the portal is the introduction of the super and regular user. So super user means that you have the authority to add portal users into the system without going through DIFC. So usually the super user would be when you first incorporate the company and you're given the login details, this would be the super user that has ultimate control over the portal. And the super user then can add or remove users and give access to people to basically access the DIFC portal. And the regular user then would have their own set of login details, and they will not have the authority to then add or remove. Only the super user can add or remove. In most instances, for a lot of our clients, we are the super user, so we have the authority to remove and appoint portal users. So if you would like us to, look into that, please feel free to reach out to us, and we can assist you with that. But this is, again, another development on the portal to ease the way in which, accessing the portal is done, and minimizes the requirement to reach out to the DIFC every time you want to add a portal user. The final development is the passport certifications. So as most of you are aware, when it comes to filing passport copies on the portal with the DIFC, they have to be certified either by a registered lawyer, a chartered accountant, a bank, or a notary public. So any of these bodies have the capability of certifying passports. So currently, before this was introduced, actually, DIFC required certified passports for directors directors mainly, actually, for new incorporations, and for every time a director was changed, a certified passport was required. So now DIFC have removed the requirement for certified passport copies for any post-incorporation applications. So any changes to the directors no longer require certified passport copies, and have only reserved it for the incorporation of new applications. So that, again, eases the way in which we do business in the DIFC, and a positive development there. So I will now leave it to Isabella to discuss the emergency measures, and she will take you through the next few slides on that.
You might be aware that the DIFC over a few weeks, we're really looking into very seriously into the operational challenges that DIFC entities are facing. Financial institutions, reinsurers, ancillary service providers, retailers, holding entities, pretty much every type of the operation with COVID-19 started facing difficulties. And there were two lines of thinking about how you approach that situation. I mean, of course, simplifying, right, the discussions that were taking place. One of them was the idea to say, okay, well, this is the DIFC financial free zone. The entities who operate in the DIFC usually hire people who are professional, who are more independent, and who are there prepared to work very hard when the economy is doing very well, but also who are understanding of challenging situation and sometimes the need that arises to cut some of the employee rights and privileges that may function well when the economy is doing well. But of course, there was the other side of the spectrum, and that side was the expression of concerns about the well-being of the employees and really ways of securing the talent on the ongoing basis for the DIFC, making sure that those employees that companies really need and will need in times when the economy is back on track, that those individuals are protected to the extent that they have sufficient means to somehow go through the difficult period of time. So we've got, one side of protecting the business and its fiscal stability, but on the other hand, securing talent and making sure that individuals who work for the DIFC entities are also protected. Now, probably there isn't really a way to make sure that everybody is happy, but the DIFC thought, well, at the end of the day, we are the free zone that operates in a very common law-like way. We are based on the model from England and Wales, Singapore, Hong Kong, and we have to help companies survive the difficult times. If we help companies, those businesses will be able to secure employment slots for their employees, and those companies will be looking after their employees. So it starts with us helping companies take measures they may need to take so that those companies could look after their employment side of things. And as a result of those discussions, on the 4th of April, the President enacted a directive. It's Directive number 4 of 2020, if anybody would like to note that down. But that directive introduces emergency measures in relation to employment. It introduces amendments to the employment law that came into force on the 28th of August 2019. For those of you who have been in the DIFC for many years now, you may remember that the August 2019 employment law came as a revision of the former DIFC employment regime. On its own, it introduced a number of measures, but yet to the 2019 regime, that new presidential directive introduces emergency measures. Now, highlights on the slide that you can see now are actually twofold. First of all, when we talk about emergency measures that can be adopted by employers in relation to their staff, their employees, we need to remember that those measures under the DIFC law as it stands now can only concern employment relationships over the period of the 4th of April this year and the 31st of July 2020, unless really the application of the regime gets extended by way of a legislative piece in the coming weeks or months. We need to remember that the 31st of July this year is the period of time that closes ability by employers to impose or implement any of those measures towards their employees. So as you can see, it's a short-term emergency plan that's supposed to help businesses over those really very badly hit months as a result of the virus. Now, what measures have been introduced? Well, the first one that the DIFC said could be adopted is companies in the DIFC, retailers in the DIFC, any type of operation in the DIFC can introduce reduced working hours for their employees. Now, reduced remuneration can be introduced also in relation to the employment relationships over that period of time ending on the 31st of July. Annual leave, what happens with annual leave? Well, a number of employees in the DIFC have annual leave, and maybe you would like to incentivize them to use that annual leave. But essentially, if the employee was to say, well, you know what, I'm actually not prepared to take my annual leave now, although it could be best suited timing for the business before the emergency measures came into place. As the DIFC business, we were not able to really impose annual leave. Now you're able to send a notice to your employees. You would have to notify them about any of those emergency measures 5 days, at least 5 days in advance of the imposition of those measures. But you can do that, and you can say to the employee, well, between days so and so, we consider that you be on annual leave. Now, restricted workspace access, of course, is one of the measures that can be imposed. So, for example, if we say to our employees, well, I'm sorry, but, we would like you to continue working from home, the employee is obliged to continue working from home. You may know under employment regime, under the employment law, there are a number of provisions that concern obligations by the employer, and some of those obligations say, well, you have to be able to give unrestricted access to the workspace to your employees. Well, under the emergency measures introduced ability to restrict that workspace access, specifically to make sure that we protect ourselves, we protect our employees, that they don't contaminate one another, that really everybody stays healthy. Now, the last one that I've addressed under this slide is the waiver of application of certain DIFC employment law provisions. Now, on one hand, we've got some measures that are pretty unusual, right? We can actually impose annual leave. We can say to the employee, your working hours for the coming 2 months are going to be at 9 to 1 p.m., for example, right? The remuneration is going to be reduced by X%. We're able to do that. But in addition, there are a number of provisions of the DIFC employment law, that regime of August 2019, that no longer apply to employment relationships over the period of time of the application of the emergency measures. Now, what are those? Well, there are few of those, but for example, there is a requirement under the employment law, the one of 2019, whereby any changes to the employment contract have to be introduced by the employer in writing, and they would need to be accepted by the employee. Now, under the emergency measures, you will see that emergency measures can be imposed by the employer, and emergency measures do not have to be approved by the employee in order to take effect. So the directive on emergency measures in relation to employment introduces certain changes in the mode of unilateral imposition by the employer without the need for those revised terms to be accepted by the employee. Now, of course, somebody can say that those measures are pretty unusual, that they are, stringent, and they are for some pretty drastic. They are, but let's remember, they have a short-term application, and they are really there to make sure that the businesses operate well. Now, when it comes to sick leave, for example, the Emergency Measures Directive also specifically addresses the scenario when our employee or employees have been found to have contracted COVID-19, right? So let's say somebody unfortunately has contracted COVID-19, or we've got employees who are finding themselves under quarantine, right? What happens then? Well, the Emergency Measures Directive says that in these two scenarios, when we have somebody who's fallen ill or who is under quarantine, although maybe they haven't really been found to have contracted COVID-19, those individuals need to take sick leave. This is mandatory sick leave, but of course, the DIFC wanted to make sure that that sick leave arising out of COVID-19 situation would not negatively impact the general sick leave entitlement that the employees have. So when an employee has a fixed number of days, or the maximum number of days that they can take over one financial year of the business, or it's actually calendar year when it comes to employment relationship, right? But they've got that sick leave applicable, then that sick leave entitlement stays for all circumstances that apply to being on sick leave, with the exception of COVID-19. COVID-19 sick leave entitlement is not going to reduce somebody's overall sick leave that is due to them in a given employment period of time. That's an important thing to remember about. Now, when it comes to the sick leave pay, when somebody is on sick leave due to COVID-19 confinement or actually contracting of COVID-19, the wages are protected for an unlimited number of days. So if somebody needs to stay on sick leave for, unfortunately 40 days, for example, or 50 days even, their wages would be protected. There would be paid 100% of their wages based on the daily AU wage. Now, let's pay attention to the calculation of that 100%. In case your business decided to reduce remuneration of the employee under the emergency measures regime that we're now discussing, the 100% of the wage is supposed to be calculated as per that reduced emergency adopted wages. So you don't have to go back to the general package. You still refer to the reduced remuneration, but again, you need to provide 100% of that reduced remuneration over the sick leave period, should the sick leave result from the COVID-19 situation. Now, part of the emergency measures are also visas of terminated employees and gratuity. Now, as an employer, you may defer cancellation of the visa of an employee who has been terminated if you want to really make sure that they can stay in the country. A lot of the people are not able to leave. We know that, of course, it's not easy to catch a flight and go to somebody's home jurisdiction, for example. But there is an option for you to keep employees on your visas if you as an employer provided accommodation for your staff. Then that accommodation is to continue over the period of time when the employee is still under your sponsorship. Now, why is that development important? Well, you might be aware that under UAE law, when your employment relationship or the employment relationship has been terminated, you've got a limited number of days to make sure that you cancel the visa of your employee. You're not allowed to keep the employee on your under the work permit and your sponsorship once the employment relationship has been terminated. Now, of course, the circumstances are difficult. People are not able to go back to their home countries, and this is why in those specific circumstances related to the emergency COVID-19, you can actually help your employees by keeping their residency status intact. When it comes to gratuity, and a number of businesses, I'm sure, will be interested to learn what happens with that gratuity entitlement. Well, first of all, you would know that from the beginning of this year, the gratuity surrounding regime has changed. That, of course, it's maintained in a different manner than for a number of years before. But the gratuity calculation remains as per the generally applicable employment relationships. So if you have chosen and you have been subject to the reduced package, reduced remuneration under the Emergency Measures Directive, your gratuity does not get impacted negatively by that revision to your package. The gratuity will be still calculated based on the original remuneration that you would be otherwise receiving if not the COVID-19 emergency measures. Now, it's quite important for you to remember that as employers, if you are found in violation of any of those restrictions that we've just addressed and any other ones that are mentioned under the presidential directive on this topic, you may be fined up to $50,000 per violation. Of course, the DIFC authority are at their discretion to choose the amount of the fine and whether to fine you or impose perhaps some other type of a sanction. But there is that risk. It's very severe. It's severe deliberately because, of course, it's so very important for all of us to comply with the restrictions, with social distancing measures, helping our employees, companies, and ourselves to continue carrying out our duties, but also to stay healthy. For employees, for example, that's also a very important thing I want to highlight. Your employees, or if you are an employee or an employer and an employee, as an employee, you have to remember in the DIFC that if you are to comply with social distancing measures, if you are not to come to the office and your employer has actually imposed working from home on you, you really need to comply with those measures. If you fail to comply, DIFC companies in their capacity as employers have a right to immediately terminate the employment relationship. A breach of those emergency measures is treated in a similar way to disciplinary dismissal circumstances, and this is why that immediate dismissal situation can be triggered. Now, we wanted to tell you as well a little bit about some other developments that impact the DIFC regime that we want you to keep in mind going forward. Now, the first one concerns the economic substance regime that has been implemented across the United Arab Emirates, and it concerns the majority of businesses throughout the country, but it specifically also concerns the DIFC companies, and there will be some obligations upon each of your DIFC businesses that result from that regime. Nov will tell you more about it. The second area of development that we would like to share with you is the envisaged expansion of prescribed companies regime by extending the availability of that very useful type of a vehicle called a prescribed company to certain other types of applicants, and I'll tell you more about that. That's really an excellent development. And then we would like to finish off just highlighting some positive developments that concern the DIFC foundations that you may be interested to learn about. And over to you, Nov, please, just to talk a little bit about the economic substance developments.
Sure. So as most of you are all aware, that the UAE has enacted economic substance regulations that applies in all of the UAE, including free zones and including DIFC. So all DIFC entities are now required to submit the economic substance notification by 12th of June 2020, regardless of whether or not this DIFC entity conducts a relevant activity or not, this notification still needs to be filed with the DIFC, and I'm pretty sure that it is done through the portal. So all DIFC companies need to do that by 12th of June. And the UAE Ministry of Finance has issued a list of the relevant activities. So this can assist you to determine whether your business falls within the category of any of those relevant activities. And we are more than happy to assist you with this assessment and to help you determine if your business falls within or out of that category. But yeah, this is just a notification requirement that is to be done by 12th of June for all DIFC entities. Isabella will discuss the prescribed companies, and I will finish the rest. Yeah.
Now on the prescribed companies regime, maybe a little bit by way of a refresher or just the update for those of you who may not be aware of that type of a vehicle. You may remember that there were options before the prescribed company regime came into place to form types of entities that served investment fund structures and also holding structures. Some businesses were formed as intermediary SPV. There were also special purpose companies under the special purpose company regulation regime. And the DIFC at some stage decided to really consolidate their regulation that concerns businesses that may form part of a larger structure, and to have them organized by way of those entities that have been formed by a certain category of applicants, and also those entities that are formed to serve a certain type of a purpose. And as a result, in October 2019, the DIFC enacted prescribed company regulation. Now, on the regulation itself, just the highlights as to why that regime is really attractive. Well, a prescribed company is a company limited by shares, and in technical terms. It can operate really pretty lightly when it comes to governance and expenses, because it can share office with some other DIFC entities. It can even use its corporate providers' office's address. The incorporation is really very low cost. I mean, it's going to cost the applicant $100 in incorporation fees and $1,000 a year in annual commercial license. So again, there were a number of attractive points, and still are, that incentivize applicants to form the vehicle as a prescribed company. Now, where we are actually at the moment, and where, well, there will be new developments coming very soon, they're close to being finalized as we speak. The qualifying applicants, so those who would be able to apply for a prescribed company license, are authorized firms, funds, FICNIC entities, holding companies, and of course you see some other categories on the slide. The purposes for which a prescribed company could be formed are quite extensive. If a business wants to form a crowdfunding platform, they would be eligible to apply for a prescribed company license. For example, aviation structure, family holding, structured financing is also the type of a purpose that the DIFC would consider to qualify for setting up a prescribed company as a vehicle. So you can see already the regime is really very broad and offers a lot to applicants, but it's just about to get even more interesting for new applications. Now, the DIFC intend to expand the regime to the following new categories of applicants. All non-retail DIFC entities, other than actually those entities who are already prescribed companies, will be eligible to apply to form a prescribed company. If there is a shareholder or shareholders in DIFC entities, then those shareholders, if they want to form a prescribed company in their individual name, maybe Mr. Ahmed owns shares in company A, but he would like to form a company in his own name, right, in the DIFC, he will be eligible to form a prescribed company in the DIFC. Affiliates of DIFC-based qualifying applicants will be able to form those entities as well. You can see some other categories on this slide that also highlight the other circumstances that will allow for that formation type. DIFC holding structure is something that will be suitable as a qualifying purpose to form a prescribed company in the DIFC. Under the previous regime, the family holding structure was the structure that could qualify as a purpose to form a prescribed company in the DIFC. But under the regime that is being expanded, any DIFC holding structure will be a suitable type of a structure to apply for the formation of a prescribed company in the DIFC. So as you can see, prescribed company regime that is already very attractive, user-friendly, not expensive, and regulated under a dedicated set of regulation as well as the company's law, it's only going to get more attractive for all of you. So please keep that vehicle in mind, because I really think it could be an excellent solution for a number of your businesses. Now, back to Nov, just briefly. Nov, if you could please talk a little bit about the DIFC Foundation.
Yes, sure. So another interesting development is the capability for a DIFC foundation to be eligible to become a holder of shares in a JAVSA company. This is ideal considering the nature of the key benefits of a DIFC foundation, particularly in terms of ownership of real estate assets and succession planning. So this development is a really good one, and something that we're keen to see implemented.
Yes, and as you might be aware, the DIFC foundation regime is has been in place and for quite some time now, and there have been regularly developments that confirm new types of utilizations of that vehicle, new jurisdictions where we would be able to also use DIFC foundation as a holder of shares and assets. For example, when the DIFC foundation was introduced, one of the important inquiries that we were working towards with the DIFC and the land department was to make sure that the DIFC foundation was a vehicle that could hold title to real estate assets, and that in principle is already behind us. There are a number of real estate assets that are owned by DIFC foundations. Then we were trying to introduce the DIFC foundation as a vehicle under structures that have entities established throughout the Emirates, throughout free zones. And of course, it took a little bit of discussions with other free zones, with onshore authorities, to make sure they are familiar with the vehicle. One of the challenges was the fact that the DIFC foundation, being a foundation, not really being a company, does not have owners in the strict sense of the word. It has founders. But this is behind us, and that development with the Jebel Ali free zone being very open to have the DIFC foundations own shares in JAFSA entities, again, is a very interesting development, especially that so many businesses throughout the Emirate of Dubai have their licenses in Jebel Ali free zone, and linking the two free zones to DIFC and JAFSA was a huge milestone. Now, for today, we would like to close the webinar on that note. Now, I would like to thank you very much for participating. We really hope you found the webinar informative, and we will be organizing more webinars on various topics. We'll make sure that you receive our invitation. As mentioned in the beginning, the webinar has been recorded. Each of you is going to receive a link to the recording, and you can go back through the recording at your convenience. Also, we have received questions under the chat box. We will know who sent what question to us, and you will be receiving answers from us in relation to those questions for sure. So although we have not been able to give you the ability to raise those questions with us online for the logistic reasons, please do not worry, the answers are going to reach each of you in relation to all of your questions. So once again, thank you very much, and we hope you are well, your families are well, and your employees are well, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.
Thank you very much, everyone.